The rain fell in relentless sheets, hammering the cracked pavement of Eldridge Street as if the sky itself were grieving. Walter Grayson, 82 years old and frail as a winter branch, stood motionless under the flickering street lamp, clutching a single rose. 50 years ago, he'd promised her as Clara he'd never let her birthday pass without this ritual. But tonight, his knees buckled, and he sank to the ground, sobbing like a child. It began as it always did. The same walk from their old apartment to the corner of Eldridge and Maple, where Clara's laughter once echoed against the brick walls. She'd loved her birthday, not for the gifts but for the little things: Walter's off-key singing, the way he'd sneak a rose into her coat pocket, the warmth of their hands entwined as they strolled through the city. Even after her death, just 3 years into their marriage, Walter kept the promise. Every March 12th, he walked to that corner, laid a rose on the bench where they'd shared their first kiss, and whispered her name into the wind. For 50 years, he'd never missed a day, no matter the weather, no matter the ache in his bones. Tonight, though, something broke. The rose slipped from his trembling fingers, its petals crushed under his worn shoes. Walter's chest heaved, and his sobs mingled with the rain. Passers-by hurried past, their umbrellas shielding them from the old man's pain. He wasn't crying for Clara alone, not anymore. The weight of 50 years, of a life stretched thin by devotion and loss, had finally crushed him. What was the point of it all? The bench was just a bench now, the rose just a flower. Clara was gone, and he was alone. As he knelt there, the rain soaking through his coat, a young woman stopped. She was maybe 20, with a bright yellow raincoat that seemed to defy the storm's gloom. "Hey, you okay, mister?" she asked, crouching beside him. Her voice was soft but firm, cutting through the haze of Walter's despair. He looked up, startled, his eyes meeting hers green, like Clara's had been. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. "I'm fine," he muttered, wiping his face with a shaking hand. "Just leave me be." But she didn't move. Instead, she picked up the crushed rose and held it gently, as if it were something precious. "This yours?" she asked, her tone carrying no pity, only curiosity. Walter nodded, unable to speak. The girl tilted her head, studying him. "Looks like it means something. Want to tell me about it?" He didn't know why he started talking. Maybe it was her eyes, or the way she sat there in the rain, unbothered, waiting for him to answer. He told her about Clara, about the summer they met at a diner, her laugh like a melody, the way she'd tease him for overcooking her birthday pancakes. He told her about the accident that took her, a drunk driver, on a night that should have been ordinary. And he told her about the rose, the bench, the promise he'd kept for half a century. The girl listened, her face unreadable but her eyes steady. When he finished, she handed him the rose. "That's beautiful," she said simply. "But you look like you're carrying more than just her memory. What's got you so heavy tonight?" Walter hesitated. No one had ever asked him that, not in 50 years. The truth spilled out before he could stop it. "I'm tired," he whispered. "Tired of living for a ghost. Tired of being the only one who remembers." The girl nodded, as if she understood more than she should for someone so young. "My name's Lily," she said, offering a small smile. "And I think Clara would have liked you to keep living, not just remembering." Her words stung, sharp and unexpected. Walter stared at her, the rain blurring his vision. He wanted to argue, to tell her she didn't understand, but something in her voice held him back. She stood, brushing water from her raincoat, and held out her hand. "Come on, let's get you out of this rain. There's a diner just down the street. My treat." Walter didn't move at first. He looked at the rose in his hand, then at the bench, then at Lily's outstretched hand. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something: hope, maybe, or just the possibility of not being alone. He took her hand, and she helped him to his feet. The diner was warm, its neon sign buzzing softly as they stepped inside. The smell of coffee and fried eggs filled the air, and for a moment, Walter could almost imagine Clara sitting across from him, her smile lighting up the booth. Lily slid into the seat opposite him, ordering 2 coffees without asking. "So," she said, leaning forward, "what was Clara's favorite thing about her birthday?" Walter blinked, caught off guard. No one had asked about Clara in decades, not like this. He found himself talking again, the memories spilling out like water from a cracked dam. Lily listened, laughing at the right moments, asking questions that pulled him deeper into the past. But it wasn't just the past she drew out. She asked about his life after Clara, the years he'd spent working as a carpenter, the books he read to pass the lonely nights. She didn't let him hide behind his grief. As they talked, Walter noticed something odd about Lily. She seemed to know Eldridge Street too well, mentioning details about the neighborhood that felt strangely familiar. The way she described the old bakery on the corner, closed for 20 years, or the way the street lamps flickered just before dawn, it was as if she'd lived here her whole life. But she was too young for that, wasn't she? You from around here? He asked, his voice gruff with suspicion. Lily hesitated, her smile faltering for the first time. Sort of, she said, stirring her coffee. My grandma used to live here. She told me stories about this place. Said it was special. Walter's heart skipped. Your grandma? What was her name? Lily looked down, her fingers tightening around her mug. Clara, she said softly. Clara Marie. The world seemed to stop. Walter's breath caught in his throat, and the diner's warmth turned cold. Clara Marie? He repeated, his voice barely a whisper. That's my Clara. Lily met his eyes, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, faded photograph. It was Clara young, radiant, laughing in a park Walter recognized from their first date. This is her, isn't it? Lily asked. Walter's hands shook as he took the photo. It was her. His Clara. But how? His mind raced, piecing together the impossible. Clara had been pregnant when she died, but they'd never told anyone. The doctors said it was too early, that the baby hadn't survived the crash. Yet here was Lily, with Clara's eyes, her grandmother's name, and a photograph that shouldn't exist. I don't understand, Walter said, his voice breaking. How is this possible? Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. I didn't know either, not until I found her letters. My mom was adopted, raised by another family. She never knew about you. But Grandma Clara, she wrote about you. She loved you so much. Walter's world tilted. The grief he'd carried for 50 years cracked open, and something new flooded in: wonder, pain, and a fragile kind of joy. He wasn't alone. Clara's love had lived on, not just in his memory, but in this girl sitting across from him. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a soft glow over the chipped formica table where Walter sat, clutching the photograph of Clara. His hands trembled, not from age but from the weight of Lily's words. Clara's child, his child, had survived, and here was her granddaughter, a living echo of the woman he'd loved and lost. Lily sipped her coffee, her eyes never leaving Walter's face. She seemed to sense the storm inside him, giving him space to process the impossible. I found the letters last year, she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. They were in an old trunk in my mom's attic. Grandma Clara wrote about you, about the life you planned together. She called you her steady hand. Walter's throat tightened. He could almost hear Clara's voice, teasing him with that nickname when he'd fix her wobbly kitchen table or hold her through a sleepless night. She never told me she was writing letters, he said, his voice hoarse. She was private like that. Lily nodded, pulling a small bundle from her bag. The letters were yellowed, tied with a faded blue ribbon. She wrote these in the hospital, before the end. They were meant for you, but I guess she never got the chance to send them. Walter stared at the bundle, afraid to touch it. 50 years of grief had built a wall around his heart, and these letters threatened to tear it down. He reached out, his fingers brushing the ribbon, and a memory flashed: Clara tying her hair back with a similar ribbon, her smile bright as the summer sun. He untied the bundle and opened the first letter. My dearest Walter, it began, in Clara's looping handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. But I need you to know you were my everything. Our baby's coming, and I know you'll love her like you loved me. Keep her safe. Keep living. The words blurred as tears filled Walter's eyes. He hadn't known about the baby, not really. Clara had mentioned feeling different, but they'd only suspected. The accident had stolen her before they could be sure. Yet here was proof, in her own words, that their child had been real. And Lily was the result. How did you find me? Walter asked, his voice shaking. Tonight, of all nights? Lily hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. I've been coming to Eldridge Street for weeks, ever since I read the letters. Grandma wrote about this place, about the bench, the rose, your promise. I didn't know if you'd still be here, but I had to try. Tonight, I saw you and I just knew. Walter's heart ached with a mix of joy and regret. He'd spent 50 years mourning Clara, believing he'd lost everything. But she'd left him a piece of herself, a legacy he'd never imagined. He looked at Lily, searching her face for more of Clara, her nose, her stubborn chin. It was all there, hidden in the lines of a stranger who wasn't a stranger at all. The diner door swung open, letting in a gust of cold air. A man stepped inside, shaking rain from his coat. He was middle-aged, with a tired face and a slight limp. Lily glanced at him and tensed, her expression shifting. "That's my dad," she said quietly. "He doesn't know I'm here." Walter followed her gaze. The man Lily's father, Clara's son, scanned the diner, his eyes landing on them. He approached, his brow furrowed with concern. "Lily, what are you doing? It's pouring out there. And who's this?" Lily stood, her hands fidgeting. "Dad, this is Walter." He knew Grandma Clara. The man's face hardened, a flicker of pain crossing his eyes. "Clara? My mother." He looked at Walter, suspicion warring with curiosity. "What's this about?" Walter's heart pounded. This was his son, the child he'd never known existed. He wanted to stand, to embrace him, to explain everything, but his body felt anchored to the booth. "I'm Walter Grayson," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos inside. "I was married to your mother." The man, his name was Thomas, Lily said, froze. He sat down slowly, his eyes never leaving Walter. "Married? She never. I was told she died alone. The adoption agency said there was no family." Walter's chest tightened. "I didn't know about you," he said. "If I had, I'd have fought to keep you. I loved her. I still do." Thomas's face softened, but there was a hardness there too, a lifetime of unanswered questions. "Why didn't you look for me?" he asked, his voice low. "All these years, you were out here, keeping some tradition, while I grew up thinking I had no one." The accusation cut deep. Walter wanted to explain the grief, the emptiness, the way he'd clung to Clara's memory because it was all he had. But before he could speak, Lily reached across the table, touching her father's hand. "Dad, he didn't know, but he's here now. And so are we." Thomas looked at her, then at Walter, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, heavy with years of loss and misunderstanding. Finally, he spoke. "Tell me about her. My mother. I want to know who she was." Walter's breath caught. He'd spent decades talking to Clara in his mind, but now he was being asked to share her with someone else, someone who had her blood, her spirit. He started with the small things, her love for jazz, her habit of humming while she cooked, the way she'd dance in the kitchen when she thought no one was watching. Thomas listened, his face softening with every word, and Lily smiled, her eyes bright with tears. As the night wore on, the diner became a time capsule, holding stories of Clara that Walter hadn't spoken aloud in years. Thomas asked questions, hungry for details, and Walter gave them, each memory a bridge between the past and the present. But there was something else in Thomas's eyes, resentment, maybe, or the weight of a life shaped by absence. When the diner's clock struck midnight, Thomas stood. "I need time," he said, his voice gruff. "This is a lot." He looked at Walter, then at Lily. "We'll talk again. Soon." Walter nodded, his heart heavy but lighter than it had been in years. As Thomas left, Lily stayed, her presence a quiet anchor. "He'll come around," she said. "He's just not used to family." Walter looked at her, this girl who'd appeared like a miracle in the rain. "And you? Why are you here, Lily? Why now?" She smiled, a little sadly. "Because I wanted to know where I came from. And because I think you needed to know you're not alone." Walter woke the next morning with Clara's letters scattered across his small kitchen table, their words etched into his mind. The rain had stopped, and sunlight streamed through the cracked window of his apartment, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. For the first time in years, he felt a purpose beyond the ritual of Clara's birthday, a fragile hope that he might rebuild what he'd thought was lost forever. Lily had given him her phone number before they parted at the diner, promising to meet again. Walter clutched the scrap of paper like a lifeline, rereading her neat handwriting. He wanted to call, to hear her voice, to ask about Thomas, but fear held him back. What if Thomas didn't want him in their lives? What if this fleeting connection was just another thing to lose? He spent the day walking through the city, not to the bench, but to places he and Clara had loved: the park where they'd fed ducks, the bookstore where she'd linger over poetry. Each step felt like a conversation with her, a way to ask her what to do next. By afternoon, he found himself back at Eldridge Street, standing before the bench. It looked different in the daylight, less like a shrine and more like a place where life had happened. As he stood there, a voice called out, "Walter." It was Lily, but she wasn't alone. Beside her was a woman, older than Lily but younger than Thomas, with sharp eyes and a cautious smile. "This is my mom, Sarah," Lily said, her voice bright but nervous. "She's well? She's your daughter." Walter's knees nearly gave out. Sarah stepped forward, her expression a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Lily told me about you," she said. "I didn't believe her at first, but then she showed me the letters." Walter's voice failed him. He looked at Sarah, searching for Clara in her features. There it was, the same stubborn chin, the same spark in her eyes. "I didn't know," he managed to say. "I swear I didn't know." Sarah nodded, her lips tight. "I know. It's just strange. Growing up, I thought my parents were gone. Now here you are, and I don't know what to do with that." Lily stepped between them, her energy a bridge. "Let's walk," she suggested. "There's a park nearby. Grandma wrote about it in her letters. Said it was where you two fell in love." They walked together, the three of them, through streets Walter hadn't seen with fresh eyes in decades. Sarah was quiet at first, but Lily filled the silence with questions, pulling stories from Walter like threads from a tapestry. He told them about Clara's love for sunflowers, how she'd plant them every spring, even when they lived in a tiny apartment with no yard. Sarah listened, her guarded expression softening as she recognized pieces of herself in the stories: her own love for gardening, her habit of humming without realizing it. At the park, they sat on a bench, not Clara's bench, but one under a sprawling oak. Sarah finally spoke, her voice low. "I always wondered about my mother. The adoption agency didn't tell me much, just that she died young. I used to make up stories about her, about what she was like. Now I know, and it hurts, but it's good, too." Walter's heart ached. "I wish I'd found you sooner," he said. "I'd have given anything to be there." Sarah looked at him, her eyes softening. "You're here now? That's something." The moment was interrupted by a shout from across the park. Thomas appeared, his face stormy as he strode toward them. "Lily, what the hell is this?" he demanded, gesturing at Walter. "You didn't tell me you were bringing him into this." Lily stood her ground, her voice calm but firm. "Dad, he's family. You can't keep running from that." Thomas's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Walter thought he might walk away. But Sarah reached out, touching her brother's arm. "Tom, just listen. He's not here to hurt us. He's been hurting, too." Thomas glared at Walter, his anger a wall. "You think you can just show up after 50 years and be my father? I don't need that. I've done fine without you." The words stung, but Walter understood. He'd carried his own anger at fate, at the driver who'd taken Clara, at himself. "I don't expect you to call me anything," he said quietly. "But I'd like to know you. Both of you. If you'll let me." Thomas didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. They sat in silence, the park alive with the sounds of children playing and birds singing. Lily broke the tension, pulling out a small sketchbook. "Grandma wrote about drawing with you," she said to Walter. "Said you were terrible at it, but you tried anyway." Walter laughed, the sound surprising him. She was right. I couldn't draw a straight line to save my life. Lily grinned, handing him a pencil. "Show me." They spent the afternoon drawing, laughing at Walter's clumsy attempts and Sarah's surprisingly deft sketches. Thomas watched, his expression softening as the hours passed. By the time the sun began to set, he joined in, sketching a lopsided sunflower that made Lily giggle. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. As they walked back to Eldridge Street, Walter felt lighter, as if the weight of 50 years had shifted. He wasn't alone anymore. Clara's love had found him again, in the faces of her children and granddaughter. But there was still a question in his heart. Could he be the father they needed after all this time? Spring returned to Eldridge Street, and with it, the first anniversary of Walter's reunion with Lily, Sarah, and Thomas. The bench at the corner of Maple still stood, its wood weathered but sturdy, a silent witness to his 50 years of devotion. This time, Walter didn't come alone. Lily walked beside him, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers, Clara's favorite. Sarah and Thomas followed, their steps hesitant but present. The air was crisp, the sky a soft blue, and for the first time in decades, Walter felt the weight of Clara's birthday as something shared, not solitary. They reached the bench, and Walter placed a single rose among the sunflowers, his hands steadier than they'd been in years. "She'd have loved this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. All of us here, together. Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening. I think so too. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, framed photo of Clara, taken from one of Walter's old albums. I thought we could leave this here. Not forever, just for today. Thomas said nothing, but he helped Sarah place the frame, his fingers lingering on the wood. Over the past year, he'd softened, joining Walter and Sarah for coffee, then dinners, then long talks about Clara. He still carried a shadow of resentment, but it was fading, replaced by a cautious trust. Lily, ever the spark, knelt by the bench and began planting sunflower seeds in the small patch of earth nearby. Grandma's flowers, she said, grinning at Walter. Maybe they'll grow this time. Walter smiled, his heart full. The ritual he'd kept for 50 years had changed, but it hadn't ended. It had grown, like the family he'd found. They spent the day together, sharing stories, laughing, and sometimes crying. Walter told them about Clara's dreams, her hope to travel, to open a little bakery, to raise a family. Sarah shared her own dreams, her work as a teacher, her love for her students. Thomas spoke less, but when he did, it was with a quiet intensity, revealing a life shaped by loss but also by resilience. As the sun set, a stranger approached, a woman in her 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes. She carried a small notebook and stopped at the bench, watching them. "Excuse me," she said, her voice hesitant. "Are you Walter Grayson?" Walter frowned, nodding. "That's me. Do I know you?" The woman smiled, a little sadly. "My name's Evelyn. I knew Clara. We were friends, back when we were kids. I saw you here last year, on her birthday. I've seen you here every year, actually." Walter's breath caught. Another piece of Clara, appearing like a gift. "You knew her?" he asked, his voice trembling. Evelyn nodded, opening her notebook. "She used to write me letters, too. After she met you, they were all about you, how happy you made her. I wanted to find you, to tell you, but I didn't know how. Then I saw you with them." She gestured to Lily, Sarah, and Thomas, "and I thought maybe it's time." She handed Walter the notebook, filled with Clara's words from a time before they'd married. He read a few lines, his heart aching with love and loss. Clara had written about him, about their future, about the baby she hoped to have. It was another thread connecting him to the family he'd found. Evelyn stayed, sharing stories of Clara's childhood, her mischief, her kindness, her stubborn streak. Lily listened, wide-eyed, while Sarah and Thomas leaned in, hungry for more. Walter felt Clara's presence in every word, as if she were sitting there with them, laughing under the spring sky. As night fell, they left the bench, promising to return next year. Walter walked home with Lily's arm linked through his, Sarah and Thomas close behind. Evelyn had given him her number, promising to meet again. For the first time in 50 years, Walter didn't feel like he was carrying Clara alone. Her love lived in her children, her granddaughter, her friend Anne in him, still steady after all these years. Back in his apartment, Walter sat at his kitchen table, Clara's letters beside Evelyn's notebook. He opened one of the letters, reading her words again. "Keep living," she'd written. And for the first time, he felt like he was